like Persona a lot. I've been a huge fan of the series ever since Persona 3 came over to the States. I never got around to playing the first three games in the series, but those were pretty different from the rest of the games, and so I never really went back to them. I had played some JRPGs before getting into the Persona series, but it was only a Final Fantasy game here and there. Persona 3 was basically my gateway into the genre, and since then I've dug into a ton of different JRPGs, like the Tales series, to Eternal Sonata, to even going back to playing some older ones like Chrono Trigger. I guess what I'm trying to say is, thanks for opening this black hole that sucked up hundreds of hours of my life. So yeah, the Persona series was incredibly important for helping to shape the kinds of games that I play. I generally tend to look for something with a strong story or a lot of characterization, something the Persona series is known for. So you can imagine how excited I was when the announcement for Persona 5 came out years back. The wait for Persona 5's release was really long, given that Persona 4 released on the PS2 in late 2008. This was likely because Persona 4 was so successful that a series of side games popped up in its wake, including a couple of fighting games, a portable version, an Etrian Odyssey clone, and a dancing game. While all these games were fun in their own right, they also built more and more anticipation for what the actual full-blown next game in the series would be. Combine all this with a couple of delays of Persona 5's release date, and it's easy to say that I was very much ready to finally play this game. Of course, this also means that there were very high expectations on this game because of Persona 3 and 4. Was it worth the wait? Is it a worthy successor to Persona 3 and 4? Let's find out.
Wake up, get up there. Raise your voice, I guess like yours. Feed your anger like fire. Like a star burning wood jet.
So, in case that intro meant nothing to you because you've never played a Persona game, here's a quick introduction as to how the games are set up, at least starting from Persona 3 on. You're a silent protagonist anime boy, or maybe a girl that one time, who's going to live in a new place for a year, transferring into a new school and dealing with all the social difficulties that come from that. You make friends with your classmates and other people you meet and probably have some kind of mystery to solve. Also, you awaken to wild mind powers that let you summon crazy monsters for one reason or another, and fight some kind of evil force that's going to wreck the world somehow. These monsters you summon are called personas, and they are based on a variety of mythological figures. They are categorized by the major arcana of tarot cards, and how they are utilized varies from game to game, but that's the gist. I'll be going into more specifics of it later in the video. And with that, we get into Persona 5 itself. Here's the setup. You're a high school guy who runs into some trouble with the law for dubious reasons, and has to transfer to a new school after being expelled from yours. You find yourself staying in Tokyo, living above a coffee shop, and going to a new school where everyone thinks you're some kind of delinquent. You fall in with other misfits to form the Phantom Thieves, a shadowy group that uses supernatural means to change the hearts of corrupt people and change the world for the better. The game's story revolves around the Metaverse, a parallel world that arises from people's cognition, which you conveniently stumble into on your first day of school. The Metaverse is where our heroes go to alter people's distorted desires by infiltrating elaborate palaces which represent how they see the world. The Phantom Thieves hope that they can use their newfound powers to make the world a better place, but naturally there's other forces at play that won't make that so easy.
Stop right there!
Take him down, Joker!
The thing about Persona 5 that's really striking right off the bat is its sense of style, from its characters to its world to its user interface and its soundtrack, which all combine into a cohesive aesthetic that's really eye-catching. The game pays attention to the little things in a way that others don't. When other games just use quick loading screens or fade to and from black to transition between scenes, Persona 5 uses slick transitions that reflect the way you're moving around the world, whether you're taking a train, walking through a city, or even sneaking through a dungeon. The way the transitions into out of battles look, even the visual design of the menu screens, all of these things are stylish in a way other games don't even try to be. All of these things may not seem to be a big deal on their own, but they add up to really make this experience special. Another reason for how striking the visuals are in this game are due to the use of color. The previous Persona games each used one color to represent the game as a whole, be it Persona 3's somber, cool blue, Persona 4's warm and friendly yellow, and Persona 5's very stark and almost passionate red. The use of the red against a backdrop of black and white really makes the visuals pop. Persona games are huge, sprawling adventures, but they never lose sight of those smaller details that fill in the seams to make the experience consistently enjoyable all the way through. Now, I can't talk about this game's style without mentioning the music. The game's soundtrack, composed by Shoji Meguro, the same composer from the previous Persona games, is a perfect complement to the aesthetic that the visuals set up. The game is telling a story of a heroic group of rogues performing daring acts for the greater good, and the music fills this milieu to a T. Many of the game's theme songs, like its opening theme, Wake Up, Get Out There, work piano and violins into the catchy beats and bass lines, which fit the general concept of the Phantom Thieves and the many outlaws and rebels that the game's personas spring from, like the gentleman thief Arsène Lupin.
Wake up, get up there. Raise your voice, I guess like yours.
The game has great relaxing music to vibe to when you're hanging out around town and meeting up with friends, but also does a great job of ratcheting up the tempo and tension when things get going. It's really easy for RPG music to get kinda tiresome because you're hearing the same songs over and over and over again. But Shoji Meguro is a master composer who makes the music feel as fresh at hour 80 as it is at hour 1. In particular, Persona 5's main battle theme, Last Surprise, is excellent and my favorite out of all the Persona series. Of course, all the presentation tricks in the world would be wasted if the game itself weren't worth playing through, and a lot of the success of the Persona series comes from its memorable and well-defined characters. Getting to know your many party members and other acquaintances is the main driving force that keeps the stories of these games going, and the social link system allows you to get to know these characters outside of the context of the main storyline, getting more of a sense of what they're like deep down, what they value, that kind of thing. It makes the characters from Persona stick with me in a way that other series characters don't often do, even when it comes to their silent protagonists. The Persona writers do a good job of designing the responses you can pick for your main character when he's talking to other people, in a way that develops a personality for him even though he doesn't really talk all that much. Persona 5 does the best job of this yet, with its main character, codenamed Joker, having established enough backstory and character traits from the get-go that the player has the sense of what kind of person he is, even though he is mostly silent.
What a show-off. You're so reckless, you know that?
Beyond the main character, of course, the game is filled with a colorful cast of characters, both playable in your party and available as confidants. This game's named for social links. Everyone's going to have their favorite and least favorite party members, but as a whole, I think this group is really well realized, and I don't think there's any characters in particular that could be considered weak. If I had to pick some favorites, I would say that my favorites are probably Haru and Makoto, and not just because their personas are really awesome. The party members each get an establishing moment in which they awaken to their personas, and also get their cool Phantom Thief outfits, which lead to some of the game's more memorable scenes and help you get attached to the characters. Though you have to wonder how they don't flinch after ripping a mask off their face. Okay, fuck! That hurts! Okay, alright, let's do this. The Persona series is no stranger to dark, mature storytelling, but Persona 5 brings that to another level. Generally, the game revolves around the theme of rebelling against a corrupt system run by people who are using that system to benefit from it, making it perhaps the most perfect game to come out in 2017. It might be a pretty cliche thing to hear teenagers talk about shitty adults all the time, but there are some people in this game that are up to some sinister stuff. The game isn't shy about tackling themes such as physical and sexual abuse, extortion, suicide, and a whole host of others. And its willingness to work with things as serious as this lends a sense of urgency to the problems you're trying to solve. The Phantom Thieves come into being because people in power have let themselves become corrupt and are a threat to those around them, coming to the aid of people who would otherwise be helpless. As such, you're not fighting just nebulous shadows or even just individual people. You're fighting against a system that needs to be changed for the good of society. It's pretty intense. The way the game's entire story is framed lends to this darker tone, with the opening showing your main character getting arrested, tossed in some basement interrogation room, and getting the crap kicked out of him until a prosecutor shows up to hear your story. The game's plot plays out in flashback, cutting back to the interrogation here and there as something important happens or a new character appears. It's a framing device that the game puts to clever use, even if some of the cuts back and forth are pretty short and don't feel super meaningful all the time. Some of the key plot points in this game play out in anime cutscenes, which were made by Production IG, the same studio that made the Persona 5 Daybreakers anime prequel thing that serves as a nice intro to the characters and world. The production values on these cutscenes are outstanding, adapting the game's visual style from 3D models to 2D animation really well. They're beautifully done and they look great, but here's one recommendation. Before you start the game, make sure you go into the options menu and turn on the subtitles. The audio mixing in some of these scenes is not the greatest, and sometimes you really can't understand what people are saying over the music, so the subtitles were kinda necessary.
It's been a while, so I just tripped this.
Other than that though, they're really great. Okay, cool, so the game looks great, sounds great, and has a good story to tell. But what about the part where you have to play it? Well, generally the overall structure of Persona 5 should be familiar to you if you've played 3 or 4. The game is split into a series of days, and you can choose to spend your time in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with friends, trying to develop your various stats, or exploring dungeons and fighting enemies, among many others. The general push and pull of trying to decide how to spend your time well to get as much out of your days as you can while still making time to save the day is a dilemma that's familiar to any superhero, or anyone who's played a Persona game before. There are more options available to you, but the game does a pretty good job of explaining to you what you'll get out of each activity so you can try to plan things out a little better. When it comes time to get down to business and fight some shadows, this game does take a lot of influence from the previous games to make the dungeon crawling a much more unique experience. Persona 3 had Tartarus, a giant tower that you progressed up over the course of the story, while Persona 4 had individual dungeons based on the characters you had to rescue in each one. Persona 5 combines both of these concepts into its dungeon design, and builds on each of them along the way. The palaces that the thieves have to infiltrate over the course of the game are individually themed dungeons like Persona 4's, but they arise from the distorted desires of the boss character, whose shadow resides within them. For example, the first palace you encounter comes from a teacher who has major influence at your school and uses it for his own gain at the expense of his students, making the school manifest as a castle where he reigns as king. Though it is kind of a funny coincidence that the first palace is actually a castle, the rest of them throughout the game really aren't shaped like that. They take on a variety of other forms. Another important point about the palaces, which sets them apart from even the dungeons in Persona 4, is that their layouts are crafted by the developers and are set in stone. Because the way you progress through each palace is along pathways that were specifically crafted rather than generated randomly, the game can do a lot more with how the dungeons are visually presented, adding in cool set pieces and moments to your infiltrations. The fact that the dungeons are designed this way also goes a long way to make them feel like actual places that you can get a sense of the size and shape of, rather than kind of a shifting labyrinth that you're trying to make your way through. It fits well with the idea of thieves scoping out a target before going in for their big score. Along with these, Persona 5 also has Mementos, which is a lot like an upside-down Tartarus. It's a dungeon with a series of randomly generated floors that are different every time you go in, which you get access to more of as you progress throughout the story. It's a place where you can go to fight enemies, collect loot, and complete some special requests in your time off between major dungeons. While you're running through the game's many dungeons, you'll have no shortage of enemies to fight, but thankfully Persona 5 makes some smart changes to how battles work, which makes things flow more nicely. First of all, getting into fights with enemies is a lot less frustrating, since the days of running up to a blob in a dungeon hallway and wildly swinging a sword at it hoping to hit it in the back are over. The shadows in each palace are themed to the environment they're patrolling, and you are encouraged to sneak up on them until an ambush button prompt comes up and you can lock onto an enemy and start the fight with an advantage. You can even take cover and dash around the hallways, getting the drop on enemies around corners, which feels like a very cool thief-like thing to do. I can't stress enough how important it is to actually try and ambush the enemies whenever possible, because the game makes this relatively easy to do and it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it.
We can get it from it. Show me your true form.
So if you don't go into fights with an advantage, things get really risky right away. Even worse, if you let an enemy get the jump on you, your dungeon run can turn into a total disaster fast, and you might find yourself back at your last save point. Honestly, the only times I died in my entire playthrough were enemy ambushes which lined up with some unlucky crit hits that killed me really quickly. Thankfully, the dungeons have save rooms that let you save your game so the time lost to one of these unfortunate ends isn't too bad. The save room also lets you fast travel between them and also to the dungeon's entrance, which is a nice time save. The fights themselves have a bit more going on in them than Persona 4, especially thanks to the addition of a few more mechanics to consider. The most obvious addition is probably the extra elemental magics that have been added in, Nuclear and Psychic, which fans of other Shin Megami Tensei games might recognize, but were absent from the previous 2 Persona games. Another change to 5 is how the elements of light and dark work. In previous games, those elements were only instant kill shots with varying percentages. Now the game includes regular damage attacks in addition to the instant kills. Also, Persona 5 splits the difference between the last 2 games when it comes to physical attacking. While Persona 4 only had 1 type of physical damage and Persona 3 had 3, 5 has 2, with melee weapons and guns. All of these additions make the possible weaknesses that an enemy can have harder to track down, but the traditional Persona system of rewarding you for hitting an enemy's weak point by giving your character an extra turn is still in place. The goal of your average fight is to still search out your enemy's weakness and attack it, but it can take a bit more work to get there. Persona 5 adds in the concept of a baton pass, where characters can gain the ability to pass off an extra turn they've earned to another party member, so that they can attack instead with a power boost. This system makes hitting a group of enemies' different weaknesses more manageable, and it makes the party feel like they're really working together.
Lend me a hand.
Not over yet.
Persona!
Also making the party feel like a team working in concert is the fact that the game does a good job of making the characters feel distinct in combat, with each specializing in different things. With healing, buffs and debuffs, ailment recovery, different elemental attacks, physical strength, and other abilities spread throughout the party, it felt more vital in this game than ever before to keep all of your party members leveled up and ready to go because they were all going to be useful. One other major change to the combat comes in once you've hit every enemy's weakness and knocked them all down, the hold-up. Once you enter a hold-up, you have a couple of choices. You can start an all-out attack much like the previous games where you do a bunch of damage to all enemies and probably end the fight in a super stylish way, or you can talk to one of your downed foes. When you talk to an enemy, you can ask them for money or an item, or ask them to join you as one of your personas. This conversation system wasn't in 3 or 4, but is a mainstay of the Shin Megami Tensei series, so it was cool to see it come back here. The conversations you have with the personas you're trying to recruit are kinda silly, but you generally try to have to pick responses to what they're saying that will satisfy them and make them want to join you. Sometimes this is a bit weird. Hold it!
Poo-poo! Poo-poo-poo!
Well, I mean, you could come join me.
Poo-poo! Poo-poo!
I don't really
Poo-poo! Poo-poo! Poo-poo!
So do you want to join the party or not?
Poo-poo!
Well, then fine. As you collect more and more personas, you can take them to the Velvet Room and make some magic happen. The Velvet Room is home to Igor and the twin wardens, Caroline and Justine, who spout exposition at you and start you on your persona quest. The reason it looks like you are in a prison is because the Velvet Room's appearance is determined by the struggles of the protagonist. In the previous games, it was an elevator lobby and a limousine. The options available to you in the Velvet Room have expanded from the previous games, and the persona fusion process has been streamlined a bit. You have your traditional fusion, which the game makes more convenient by borrowing Persona 4 Golden's Fuse by Result system that gives you a list of things you can actually make instead of having to click through a menu one by one to see what different combinations will give you. The rest of the fusion options are lumped into Advanced Fusions, which are a list of recipes you can use to combine groups of personas into one more badass one. Beyond just fusing though, you have way more stuff that you can do with personas that you don't need anymore. You can feed unwanted personas to ones you do care about in order to level them up, or you can sacrifice them to create powerful items and weapons that could be useful. Overall, the development team seems like they understood just how much time the player spends in the Velvet Room, and took some important steps to make the place more useful and more efficient. It's another one of those smart changes that makes the game really stand out. Since time passes really differently in the Velvet Room, the game does actually kind of call attention to the fact that when Joker is off doing his fusions, the rest of the party are just sort of standing around waiting for him to get ready to go into the palace, which I bet looks kind of funny. Alright, let's go infiltrate the palace, Morgana. Oh, wait, hold on.
deal with this. Alright.
Okay, ready.
Oops! Yeah, alright.
When you're not wearing your cool thief masks and beating up shadows, you still have to be a normal-ish teenager living a normal-ish life. You go to school, sit through class, answer questions, hang out with friends, work part-time jobs, and whatever else you have to do to develop your stats or relationships. Doing this is just as important as leveling up in the dungeon, because the benefits you get from your relationships in the game's many confidants have a huge impact on what you can do in the metaverse. To develop your relationships with these people, you can spend time with them and help them deal with the issues they're facing in their lives to build their trust with you, which manifests as a numbered rank from 1 to 10. In previous Persona games, leveling up your relationships with your party members gave them new combat abilities, but the rest of the social links in the games didn't really serve a purpose beyond learning about a character's story and getting a sweet experience boost when you fuse personas of the matching arcana. In 5, however, the benefits are much more meaningful. Your party member relationships still develop much the same way, though they gain some abilities unique to each character as they rank up.
I wasn't strong enough. This one, defense up.
The other confidants, though, have mechanical abilities added to their rank ups which have a huge impact on the game, making it important to meet as many of these characters as possible. Thankfully, because these abilities are so important, even including things like the ability to swap out party members mid-battle or increase the experience gained by your characters, the game does a good job of directing you towards them so you can at least start the relationship and get an idea of what they have to offer. Some of these benefits gained from these relationships are more impactful than others, but the bonuses you get early ranks at least give you an idea of what you can expect as you level that confidant up more, so you can decide where to focus your time. Speaking of spending time, expect to do a lot of that building up Joker's social stats. Your social acumen is divided into 5 different statistics: knowledge, charm, kindness, proficiency, and guts. Each of these stats has 5 levels, and there are a ton of different ways to level them up. You can read books, watch movies, play video games, work at certain jobs, hang out with certain people, or eat a giant cheeseburger, all in the name of self-improvement. Doing this is especially important when it comes to your confidant relationships, because the game has a habit of blocking you off from starting some of them or continuing others past a certain rank unless you have one of these stats up to a certain level. It's another piece of the time management puzzle that can be overwhelming, but as long as you keep goals in mind of what you're trying to get done, you can take steps towards developing the right stats. Sometimes the game throws you a bone when you're trying to build your friendships, and lets you travel to one of the many locations around the city with a friend to hang out, which will often end up with you meeting up with other friends and building a few relationships at once. You also get a cool little scene with these characters and sometimes a little keepsake to decorate your room with, which is nice. As you're under the gun to spend your time in the best way you can, expect to be buried in messages from all of your friends trying to hang out with you, even if all you want to do is feed your plants some fertilizer and do a crossword puzzle. Can I... Hold on, Hannah. Wait. No! The game stresses time management, which for the most part it is pretty manageable, but there are definitely times throughout the game where it's actively preventing me from doing that. There were periods of time when the main story completely takes days away from you. At one point there was a whole week where I didn't get to do any exploring anywhere. Plus, there's also school exams which always take 3 days away from you. I made sure to try to get the dungeons done in like 2 to 3 days to give myself as much time as possible to develop my social links. At one point I had 20 days in a row where I was free to do whatever I wanted. One detail about time management that's a change from Persona 4, the game tells you exactly how many days you have to finish a dungeon, rather than vaguely gesturing at a weather report to let you know when to hurry up. It makes planning things a bit easier, just remember not to wait until the very last day. Calling cards take time. You're not going to finish all of the social links on a first playthrough, so don't feel pressure to try and complete every single one. Start all of them, sure, but focus on the ones that either you really like the character of, or who really benefit you in the dungeon exploring. I ended up only maxing out a few social links because I kept trying to hang out with all of them, and I was a bit sad that I wasn't able to complete several of my main party members' social links. Also, yes, the memes aren't kidding. There are a ton of times during the game where you want to spend your evenings doing something useful, only to have Morgana completely stonewall you and make you go to bed. We're getting closer to figuring out who's really behind this, but you know, it's only only like 7 o'clock. I could still probably go and hang out.
Go to bed.
Oh, come on. Oh, fine. Alright, fine. It's cool. There's a lot of stuff I can do in the room. I can play some video games, or I could read, I could do some study.
Go to bed.
I can't even study! Oh, come on, that's not fair!
Go to
It's as much of a pain in the ass as it sounds. Damn mascot character. The game has 2 different audio options. You can play it with the original Japanese audio, or you can have it in English. I played with the English version because I was a big fan of the localization done for Persona 4, which was fantastic. I've heard grumbling around the internet about the quality of Persona 5's localization, but honestly, I think it's fine. Some of the pronunciations on some of the last names are kinda rough, especially the ones that are inconsistent from character to character. If you're up to speed on how to pronounce Japanese names, prepare to be frustrated, though I ended up just tuning it out after a while. While the game might not reach some of the highest highs that the Persona 4 localization did, funky student, I'm looking in your incredibly funky direction, it's pretty solid for the most part, and a lot of the dialogue between the Phantom Thieves feels natural in a way that makes these characters really feel like friends. The writing on the group texts that are sent back and forth between the team members is often really good, and some of the funny character moments happen in these. Generally, I didn't have much of a problem with the English voice work, but if you don't like it, the Japanese option is there as well.
Morgana Henshin! さあ、パンサー、レディーファーストだ。車？
ありえねえ
Morgana transform! Come now, Panther. Ladies first.
A car? No way!
So if you couldn't tell, I loved this game. It was definitely a worthy successor to the Persona franchise. I think it hit just the right balance of referring back to the older games, but still doing a lot of changes that makes it a really unique part of the series. The story and characters are engaging, the combat system continues to improve just like each Persona game, and the music and visuals are striking. Persona 5 is a good jumping off point for anyone who hasn't played a Persona game before, but there are certain aspects to it that are fascinating if you have played the other games. Sometimes it takes preconceptions that you have from 3 and 4 and turns them on its head. The complaints that I had about this were pretty minor, and only really stood out because the rest of the game is great. This game had a lot of high expectations. Persona 4 was a phenomenon, and they needed to work extra hard to make sure this game didn't fall short. This had been my most anticipated game for the last 5 years or so, basically since it was announced. I think the best thing I can say about it was that it was worth the wait. So, if you played Persona 5, did you like it better than 3 or 4? Do you think it's a worthy successor to the Persona franchise? Which characters were your favorite or your least favorite? Post your thoughts and comments below. I'm curious to see if you guys went the same way as I did with various characters that you thought were the best, which girl you romanced, or generally just what you thought of the game. I'm Calluna, and thanks for— wait a minute. I summoned a Persona before. That means I get to see some kind of cool thief or rebel who represents my inner self. Who is it?
Bubble, bubble, cheeseburger.
Oh, fuck! Hey everyone, just wanted to let you know I have a Patreon page. If you're not familiar with Patreon by now, it's a website that allows you to donate a small amount each month to your favorite content creators. You'll get a bunch of different rewards depending on the amount that you donate. Feel free to check out my page to see what kind of rewards that you can get by helping to donate. Every little bit helps, and helps to make this show even better, so wouldn't be able to do it without you guys. Thanks.
Geek Vision.
Hold it! Oh, let me—
Objection!